Hello and welcome to today's talk. We're talking about the recent archaeological discoveries at Manydown. I'm Susan Porter. I'm the lead archaeologist for MOLA on this site. We don't appear to have a video feed, but you know what? That's not going to be a big deal. Some of these slides are very heavy on the mapping, so it'll be useful for you to see everything rather than just see my face in the corner. Everyone who lives in Basingstoke is probably aware of the Manydown site at this point. It's a rather huge area of land, and I'm sure most of you saw the giant molehills popping up during the winter. So if we move, I have to say thank you very much to Ginny of the Basingstoke Archaeology and Historical Society for this beautiful aerial shot of the site from her glider. You can clearly see from this the really large scale of the site. So we started all the way up here. All of this is still evaluation trenching. All of this through here, this field and these two here were also trenched. Everything down here, and there's a little corner just missing off the bottom here that we couldn't quite fit into one complete shot. So as you can see, it's a really, really huge site. It's a site that's being dug ahead of residential development. Again, I'm sure everyone in Basingstoke is aware of the plans for the area. What we were undertaking was a commercial evaluation ahead of development plans. The work itself that we've done has been funded by Urban and Civic, so we have to thank them for putting up the money for us to be able to do the evaluation and any subsequent excavations that are going on the site. Today I'm going to be able to tell you about everything that we found in the evaluation, and we've also started some of the mitigation work, so we had an open area just down here and another one over here that I will be able to tell you about. So the evaluation is mostly a random scatter herringbone style of trenching, as you can see down here. We were looking at roughly 1–2% of the site, so as you can see it's very, very much window samples into a larger area. I will move on. Have a quick look at the statistics here. So the overall site covered 321 hectares. As I said, it's a total of 4% of the site was covered by the evaluation, not 1 or 2%, sorry, it was 4% we covered by the evaluation. We excavated 1,171 trenches. This should have been 1,175, but there were badgers who thought otherwise and prevented us from excavating a couple of the trenches. Of these trenches, 388 of them contained archaeology, so positive archaeological features that we could definitely see, we could definitely tell were something human-made. There were 783 archaeologically blank trenches, so we just couldn't see a feature in it. We stripped it down to natural geology. We saw no intervention of human sort of any kind. We created a total of 2,111 context sheets, took 4,500 photos, found several Bronze Age cremation burials, located an Iron Age settlement, confirmed 1st and 2nd century Roman settlement, and we discovered ourselves some Saxon features, which we later determined to be a settlement, which was quite exciting, really. Popping back to this slide, the aerial shot, I want to show you the divisions of the site that we broke it up into so that we could make it easier for ourselves to figure out what was going on. So up here is the north area. So this just covers the bit between the road up here and the roundabout down to the corner just there where there's another little roadway coming through. Our eastern central area covered 2 fields. This was a rather hilly area, it was very undulating. Western central area, we demarked it by this hedgerow and pathway in the middle. So this was a very large area over here. The western area was these 2 fields. The horse paddocks were just down here, they're included as part of the western area. And the southern area covered this field over here, the larger field where the end is just off the edge of the photo here, this large U-shaped field, and the small field just over this side. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of orientation as to which area of the site I'm talking about. And we will move on and start discussing what we did and what we found. So our northern area, right up at the top end of the site, we dug a total of 222 trenches. This is the highest part of the site. It has a plateau over to the west, so it's fairly flat over on this side, sloping down towards Roman Road just down here on the east. If you notice, there's no trenches put over the geological features in here. This is because a previous evaluation by Archaeology Southeast had been done several years ago that confirmed the presence of a late Iron Age, early Roman farmstead in this area, so there was no need for us to evaluate it again at this point. We already knew that was there. What we were looking at was the unknown areas around it. Obviously, the north area is very, very close to Roman Road. So we were expecting quite a lot of potential features over here, close to a road considered Roman. It's called Roman Road. We thought we might get a lot over here. What we found was a lot of tree rooting and natural sorts of features. There was very, very little dating evidence for anything, and most of the features we dug over here turned out to be of natural origin. Where we did find pottery and evidence of human activity, we found 12 sherds of beaker pottery from one of the trenches down here, 19 pieces of possible Mesolithic Neolithic flint from a pit in trench 95, which I think is this one here if I'm remembering correctly. We got a ring ditch in trench 85, which is the one just here. You can see the ring ditch just flagged up in purple there. We had another ring ditch just over here and the bigger ditch up on this end of the site. So you can see the geophysical results turned out pretty well to locate what we could see. So what we're looking at up here is the east-west ditch and our probable field system. We did find 2 burials on site, although as this was an evaluation, general practice at this point for inhumation burials and skeletal remains is that we will mark the locations where we found them, but we will leave them in situ. So I can't show you where those are because obviously they remain on site undisturbed. We'll move on to the east and central area, so we're moving down from the northern area now. The bit that I've just shown you was up over this way. We're coming down the site, so this is still Roman road on the side here, just to orient you. Again, we note that we've got an area of no trenching here over the geophysical features that we can see. This is because, again, those several years ago, ASE, Archaeology Southeast, also did an evaluation here to confirm the presence of these geophysical markings. So we know that there was another Iron Age Romano-British settlement over here. They recovered a large amount of building material in one of their trenches, so we got quite excited thinking we might find something really, really cool over here, but we didn't turn up any particularly similar material. There might have been the odd bit of roof tile or something, but nothing to suggest that there was a building anywhere. What we did find was a ditched enclosure and possible trackway, sort of extending over into the western area, so you can see our trackway just down here, with one of the ditches carrying on right the way through, and another one just over here. And what we were seeing in these ditches was that there was a lot of sequential recutting, so the ditches stayed open for extended periods of time, were used and reused, and one of the lines just here might be a recut where they'd moved it completely to a slightly different location. We also got a couple of Bronze Age cremation urns that came from one of the trenches just over here. I think it was possibly this one. Can't be certain from here. But yeah, we got two Iron Age cremation urns buried, Bronze Age cremation urns, sorry, buried side by side just in here. I'll be able to show you some pictures of those later on. So we move now over to the western area, so I'm going to orient you again, going through the gap this way, coming into the western area here. So this is the edge of those crop marks and geophysical surveys that I showed you just here. We had 198 trenches in this area. This area also had a very changeable geology, from the chalky material that we were getting over in the east to a much heavier dense clay over on the western side. We picked up small pockets of activity in this area, sort of some up here, Bronze Age and Saxon. Down here we were getting a bit of Saxon material, and over this way we were looking at a little bit more of the Bronze Age material. What we saw was obviously the ditched enclosure here that was recorded by Archaeology Southeast was continuing over into this area below the little pathway just there. The trenches south of the overhead cables, so these are overhead cables just here. These were dense with Saxon material. We were anticipating potentially settlement remains down at this end. We got a substantial amount of Saxon pottery from down here, which is quite interesting for this area. There's not a lot of Saxon remains. In fact, 2/3 of the weight of all Saxon pottery from the entire site was recovered from the trenches just down here to the south of these overheads, so we really do think there's something going on in this area. Trench 273, which is one of the ones up here somewhere, also contains Saxon pottery, and what we have might be a focal point of Saxon activity in this area. Or at least that's what we thought until we got to the mitigation phase. I will show you when I get to the slides of the mitigation phase that we were completely wrong in thinking where the Saxon activity was. Always an interesting thing with archaeology. So we're moving on now to the western area, which is again just off this slide this way. Over. So this is the western area with the 2 horse paddock enclosures down here. We had 195 trenches in this area. The central part of the western area had an Iron Age boundary and enclosure ditches, so it's this V-shaped ditch that we can see here, a little square one just in here. The southern ditches were undated at this phase of work. We had no idea to what period we could put these into. Trench 820, which is this one down here, if I'm remembering right, produced a large vessel of Bronze Age, Early Iron Age date. It was really, really big. We managed to get it lifted as one and sent back to the office, so that was quite nice. Several trenches in this area also recorded Saxon pottery, and we began being suspicious of potential Saxon settlement down in this corner. Again, as you'll see later from the archaeological mitigation works that we did where we stripped this area, we were incorrect on that point, but I'll save that for later. If we move on now past the major A road that runs through here into an area of the site, this was by far the largest area of the site that we had to deal with. It was a total of 309 trenches, and as you can see from the purple geophysical results in here, we were expecting quite a lot of material. So this area here was limited trenching. Again, Archaeology Southeast had done a few trenches here, which explains a couple of our gaps in this area, but the main thing that stopped us doing any work just around here was the presence of an extraordinarily large badger set. And this thing was huge. You could see it on Google Earth where they'd pushed everything, all the chalk up. So it was nicknamed Badger Castle for the duration of the dig, and we couldn't go anywhere near this area. We put out little flags and things to sort of demarcate where the badgers were, and every time we put flags around one of their access points, they moved to a slightly different access point, and it just kept spreading. We weren't sure whether it was because the badgers quite liked the pink flags or whether they weren't really interested in the pink flags at all and just kept thinking, oh no, the humans have put the flags up there again, we better move. But yeah, they caused us no end of trouble, did the badgers down in this area. In terms of archaeology, this part of the site was the most archaeologically dense. The Bronze Age monument of White Barrow lies immediately to the west. Those of you who know the area well have probably recognised already that White Barrow is just down here in this field, so only just off our site. Despite ring ditches identified in aerial photos over here, so there should have been some ring ditches over on this side. There was one down here that we picked up. There was another one over here. But aerial photos suggest that there should have been several ring ditches over here that we did not detect at all. But numerous undated features that we have on this side of the site could also turn out to be Bronze Age, as with the presence of White Barrow here, it's quite clear that we're dealing with a Bronze Age landscape. So we're hoping that when we get to go back and look at more of this area, we might be able to find more Bronze Age activity, which would be really fascinating. This was also the clearest evidence for continuing domestic activity through the Iron Age and into the Roman period. The curving ditches are generally Iron Age, the straight ones are generally Roman period in date. What we can see in this area is a series of agricultural enclosures with constant changes in alignment as the Roman squares supersede the Iron Age circles and penannular enclosures. So we got 2 cremations in this area, one undated, one was Roman. And we have, again, 2 unexcavated human inhumation burials, which are still on site, so we can't tell you where they are. A third inhumation burial is also known from one of ASC's evaluation trenches, although I'm not entirely sure exactly where on site that was. What we didn't find at this end of the site was any Saxon material whatsoever, so this is the only area we really haven't found Saxon material in at all. So if I briefly, because it's taken us a while to get all the evaluation data sorted out, we have actually been back onto the site. So we've done our first phase of mitigation works. So this area here, if you can vaguely remember, this area here is at the bottom of the western area of the site where we had that huge sort of V-shaped ditch coming through. So we opened up this area thinking that we were going to find Saxon settlement, and we found pretty much nothing whatsoever. This was a largely empty area, but the ditches that we've got, again, this circle here indicates where badgers were, and we couldn't dig anything here, so this area stayed in. So everything we dug is the yellow that you can just see. We think these are Iron Age enclosures now, rather than Saxon, although there was very little dating evidence that we got out of it. The ditch here seemed to have been adjusted at several points, so we had an original ditch coming up and terminating with another terminus going off this way. So we think there was an access point here. At some point, the ditches were both redug and the access point taken out so that it turned into one curving ditch all the way around. The large pit over here we think was a watering hole, but other than that, this area was pretty devoid of activity. On the other side of the site, so this is in the eastern central area, to orient, yeah, again, here's Roman Road. Just here, we're getting towards the bottom of Roman Road, and these are those triple ditches that I showed you that went all the way across to the western area. What we dug here were the ditches, huge enclosure ditches. likely to be Iron Age into Roman in date. But the surprising thing that we found, and this really did take us by surprise because we found no evidence of it in any of the trenches, were 5 Saxon sunken featured buildings with lots and lots and lots of Saxon pottery. So this was a rather nice surprise. I know several members of the Basingstoke Archaeological Society came out to visit us while we were on site and were able to have a good look around the sunken buildings here. And the local school was also able to pop out for a visit and have a good look at these Saxon buildings. So that was an exciting surprise for us when we went back to go and do the open excavation works. We hadn't expected that there would be Saxons right alongside the Roman road there. Especially with there being no particular roadside Roman activity. That in itself is very strange, but we suspect this site's going to keep throwing up strange things. So what I want to do now, having run you through roughly what we've done, a little bit more about the actual archaeology and the kind of chronology and story of the site and what was going on. So the earliest things that we found were Bronze Age, so we're looking at 2500 BC to 800 BC. And move on just here. So what I've done is I've plotted where we found Bronze Age material on the site here. So we have no securely dated Mesolithic or Neolithic features on site. However, we did get a couple of worked flints recovered in Trench 95 up in the north area, so up here. And we did find a couple of things probably deposited by hill wash in the lower area of the eastern central area. And there's a couple of other pre-Bronze Age find spots that are known to the west of the site, but we didn't really get much at all, so our earliest finds were all coming from a Bronze Age date. So the southern part of the site, as I said, lies within a wider Bronze Age funerary landscape. White Barrow down here, as we've already established, and 2 undated ring ditches that we did turn up in the south area might be associated with this. However, in the southern area we found no dating material pertaining to the Bronze Age at all. Previous ASE work did find an inhumation predating Iron Age activity, so it could be that there is Bronze Age activity down here, but we just we don't have any confirmation of it in our works. There's quite a high potential for a lot of the undated features on the entire site to be potentially Bronze Age in date. That would be really exciting if it did prove to be the case, as there's very little evidence for Bronze Age domestic settlements. So given the sort of diagonal scatter of Bronze Age material that we seem to have through the site, it would be really nice if further work on the Manydown site did reveal something else about the Bronze Age in this period, whether it was settlement activity or transitional passing through activity. It will be interesting to see whether we do get any more Bronze Age pop up. What we could be looking at is a sort of pathway from a funerary landscape down here to perhaps a more settled base elsewhere, using the Manydown site as a diagonal pathway running broadly northeast to southwest, but that's just conjectural. We don't really know that at the moment. These are examples of the Bronze Age pottery that we found. So the 2 that we found together in the eastern central area, these 2 pots buried side by side are from this spot just over here. The smaller pot on its own just here, I believe, is the one from this area, and on my next slide is the really large pot, which was one of the 2 dots down here. So there were at least 6 vessels overall recovered from the site that were of Bronze Age date, and of these 6, 3 of them were definitely cremation vessels containing human bones. These were all lifted completely, so like this, wrapped in bandages, lifted as carefully as possible and sent back to be excavated under laboratory conditions in the office. So this is just a picture of it during micro-excavation, showing the concentration of burnt bone within the inverted vessel. So this particular one was buried upside down. We're missing the base of it, and the top of the pot is down here functioning at the bottom. So it was buried upside down. I have a couple of examples of some of the more fragmented pot. So the earliest pottery is identified as beaker pottery, which is this piece up here with the twisted cord decoration. It's really, really nice. It's great to have some nice examples of it. And we have a sort of more typical Middle Bronze Age urn with a decorated rim, if you can just see the sort of incised stampy bits in there. And this is very, very typical Bronze Age pottery. So those are the earliest things that we found on the site. The site continued to be sort of occupied or used for transitional the Iron Age, so we're progressing now to 800 BC to AD 43. Iron Age best represented period on the site. All areas of the site produced finds from mid to late Iron Age date. As you can see from the array of purple find spot scatters that I've got through the site, we have several very dense concentrations of it. We know that Manydown is part of a larger Iron Age landscapes. There are settlements within the wider vicinity. Those of you who know the area of Basingstoke quite well will know about Winkbury Camp, which lies somewhere up to the north, which is a hill fort and settlement. There's banjo enclosures to the southeast, down at Kite Hill, and enclosure systems at Battledown Farm, somewhere down here to the south. So we are lying within a much, much larger Iron Age landscape. What we can see is that there seem to be 4 distinct rural areas on the site. So we have the southern area, we've got one at the base of the western area over here, the one in the middle transitional bit between the eastern and western central areas, and this one up at the northern end that we didn't really dig many trenches in, but they did identify in previous evaluations that happened on the site. So we know there are 4 distinct areas to the site. Okay, so if we just come back up to the north area, so in here, this is where Archaeology Southeast did their evaluation. What they recorded in this area that we didn't dig was rounded enclosure ditches, so sort of the squiggly ditches here, and again down this way. Rounded enclosure ditches likely to be related to the east-west boundary ditch that was identified in our excavation, so that's this one. We found 2 ring ditches, so there's just this one here, and the other one just there, if you can see them. And we have a possible trackway which is only known from the geophysical survey. Neither our trenches nor Archaeology Southeast's trenches touch these 2 double ditches here. I'm not entirely sure why, but from the geophysical results it appears to be that we have a trackway just through here. So evidence of Iron Age activity. Apologies for the sun speckles on this photograph, but this is an example of one of the slots that we dug through this more substantial ring ditch down here. You can see the nice white chalk geology and that it's a reasonably sized ditch. So the eastern and central settlement that we see, this was dominated by these 3 parallel ditches, the trackway and possible eastern boundary for the settlement over here. Again, Archaeology Southeast excavated in their trenches most of this area. Not most of the area, their trenches covered more of it than we did, sorry. What they reported was that it consisted of rounded and sub-rounded enclosures extending into the western central area, so just over this pathway here. And the geophysical results are very reliable for this site, so we can confirm that what we have is the Iron Age settlement here, as evidenced by the curving, slightly squiggly ditches that are difficult to make sense of, and what looks like this huge boundary and access trackway here. So again, just some shots of our Iron Age ditches. These are in the eastern central area. You can see the nice chalk geology and these 3 boundary ditches. The other ones just sat below the shoulder there. You can only just about see it. So we have these 3 boundary ditches here. This is a better shot of one of them coming right from the topsoil all the way down this huge ditch. And again, from one of our trenches, ditch at the end, the one here and the one up at the top. They were very, very clear, very, very substantial, and contained next to nothing in terms of dating material. So in the western area, so this is the south part of the western area, back where we had this sort of square field here and we'd been expecting the Saxons but didn't find them. This looks like it's probably an extension of activity in the southern area rather than an area of activity that's distinct and separate in itself. Due to the major aeroid in the middle, it's going to be very difficult to confirm that. But what we had was a substantial watering hole, so this was about 2.5–3 metres wide by nearly 2 metres deep. We dug most of it out with the assistance of the big yellow trowel. Again, nothing much in it. And here is what I was talking about earlier. This is the corner in the ditch, so just up here, where we seem to have originally had a terminal just here, another terminus just there, a later gully coming in along the side of it, and then something that truncated out the entirety and took away the entranceway. So this was clearly reused over an extended period of time, but again, we were getting very little in terms of dating evidence. We called this area Iron Age, but I think in reality we only have 5 or 6 sherds of pottery that can date this ditch. So tentative Iron Age is perhaps more what we should be saying. In the southern area, the Iron Age in the south is concentrated through the centre of the area. So again, like I was saying, it's possible that the one up here, just on the other side of the air road, is an extension of this, or it could be its own distinct settlement, as everything in here is concentrated in this area. Access ways through the trackway are visible on the geophysical survey. We encountered a couple of them. You can see there's a little access point just there. There's another one potentially just here, one there. It just seems to be little entrances and accesses through the trackway that's crossing the site like this. Badger Castle, as I said, caused us some issues in this area. The badgers seem to very much enjoy digging the archaeology, possibly more than we did actually, so we were unable to look at this entire area to see what was going on. This has made things a bit difficult for the interpretation of the Iron Age enclosures, but we do what we can with what we've got. Most of the pottery that came out of the southern area was of mid to late Iron Age date. What we can definitely see are several ring and penannular ditches. They seem to appear in 3 distinct areas along the trackway, so you've got a little cluster of them here, that's one area, you've got another cluster of them over here, that's 2, and then you've got more rings down here as a 3rd area. So it could be that within the settlement itself you've got 3 distinct areas of living or 3 distinct areas of working. We're still not quite sure, but it does seem to be very much grouped around. The rectangular bits in the middle here are more Roman, so we'd be looking at just distinct separate areas. The widening of the trackway to the west, so over here you can see it's quite narrow, and then as we come west we get this square, and then it seems to flare out as we get to the end. We're not certain why this is. It may reflect continuity of the Bronze Age landscape's importance, because as I said before, you have the monument of White Barrow just over here, which seems to line up almost directly with the end of the trackway there. It could be coincidence, it could be that the barrow itself posed some significance to the Iron Age landscape. We simply don't have enough information at this point. A couple of examples of Iron Age features that we found in the southern area. Again, we had this really nice chalk geology where the archaeology really stood out for us. So we just have a couple of pits in here, another fairly substantial pit just over here, and one of the larger, more substantial ditches. So this one is well over 3 meters wide, really, really huge ditch. So we then have that sort of transitional phase that we move into, where it's late Iron Age into Roman era. Obviously they don't just turn the lights off and it become Roman. Be nice sometimes if they did, but no, that's not quite how it works. So we're looking at 100 BC into 410 AD with this next phase. So features, as I say, likely to be late Iron Age Roman, with settlement and agriculture continuing on into at least the mid-2nd century. So it is just really through that transitional phase becoming more fully Roman toward the end. And again, we seem to have these dense groupings of activity in the south, activity in the west, in the sort of central area, and minimal kind of activity up towards the northern end of the site. We found nothing indicating a Roman structure during our evaluation. However, Archaeology Southeast, as I mentioned earlier, did record that one of their trenches in this central area did pick up an awful lot of Roman building material, which may indicate the presence of a structure to the north. However, we can't confirm that as we found nothing similar. So back up to the north end of the site. Sorry, there's a lot of yo-yoing backwards and forwards here, but I found it easiest to kind of explain it to you this way. So back up to the north area, our particular evaluation discovered no remains of Roman date in this area. It's the previous evaluation by Archaeology Southeast that recorded the series of enclosure ditches, which are likely to be part of a lower status rural agricultural settlement. You can see, generally if it's square, it's going to be Roman. They seem to have this thing, they like things flat, they like them square. Okay, if we move on the eastern central area of the site, so we're back here with Roman Road down the side here again. Again, for us, we didn't find much in the way of Roman material going on here, but what we had confirmed by Archaeology Southeast excavation previously was these several rectangular Roman ditches that we can see on the geophysical plan. Again, if it's straight, if it's squared corners, if it's flat, it's probably Roman. I quite like they leave their mark on the landscape that way. They also tend to leave a lot of stuff around. If it's Roman, they seem to be history's little bugs. They leave stuff literally everywhere. Flat, square, full of pottery. I rather like it. Some people don't. So, anyway, moving on. So the ditches over here seem to have superseded the Iron Age settlement that was going on, and the previous evaluation did note that a 4th century neonate burial was recovered from one of these enclosed ditches, which is the only evidence we have for any kind of activity, Roman activity, post-dating the 2nd century. We turned up nothing that was later than 2nd century date, except for potentially a coin in the southern area. And saying that, moving on to the settlement in the southern area. So we have these ladder enclosures north of the Iron Age trackway, just through here. They indicate the presence of a second potential low-status rural agricultural settlement on the site. Our sampled material from the ditches over here indicate the presence of wheat, spelt wheat and emmer wheat, with some evidence for barley, giving us an indication of land management and crop cultivation in this area. This is the only area that we've had this kind of evidence from as well. We recovered a single cremation urn from one of the larger ditches. I think it was in this trench over here. Lovely, lovely Roman pot, just stuffed full and placed right in the bottom of the ditch. A second cremation was recorded by Archaeology South East during their earlier evaluation, but again, I'm not 100% certain where theirs came from. Ours, I know, came from somewhere over here. The southern area of Manydown, more than any other, indicates the continuity of settlement through the Iron Age and Roman periods. Of all the places on site, it's likely that it was in the southern area where occupation of the site continued completely unbroken through from the Middle Iron Age right down to the 2nd century. So our Roman features then, this is the cremation urn that I was talking about, so a really nice piece of fine Roman pottery, just placed in the bottom of the ditch. We don't have a date for that just yet, unfortunately. The coin here, unfortunately, it's a little bit blurred, so you can't see it very well. The bust, you'll just have to believe me, is one of the Constantines, 4th century. It could be Constantine the Great, it could be Constantine II, Constantinian. They all seem to have names beginning with Const, so you can't really tell which ones they are. What you have on the reverse here are the winged victories, so it is an issue that we can date quite nicely. It's yes, 2 victories holding a shield above an altar. It's from 320 to 321 AD, assuming it was minted in Rome and not one of the myriad of copies that we find in this country. A lot of the 4th century Roman coins we find in the UK are all contemporary copies. It seems the official coinage wasn't making it over here, so a lot of people were just making their own. Some of them are really good, some of them are absolutely terrible. I've seen a brilliant one somewhere that just has stick people on it. It's absolutely fantastic. The ditch that we found the cremation urn in was quite a substantial one. We didn't get all the way to the bottom of it, but you can see that there's this huge build-up of layers, so it clearly lay open for quite some time. We move on now into our early medieval Saxon period, which is the latest period of remains that we found on the site. Our Saxon activity was found throughout the central area of the site during the evaluation, with a dense concentration over here, which is why we thought we were going to be finding settlement in this area when we came back to strip it for the mitigation, and we were surprised when we found it over here because we only found Saxon material during the mitigation phase when we were digging the sunken buildings out, which is what this dot is here. If you ignore that dot, I'll put my laser pointer over it, what we found in the evaluation was just where the green dots are there, so you can see how surprised we were to find what looks like a Saxon settlement underneath this dot just next to the road. So we had a total of 10 features in the evaluation that produced Saxon material. Most of them came from the southeast corner of the western central area. So again, it was over here underneath the overhead cables. This is where we definitely thought we might have a Saxon settlement or something lurking just off site here. We found 5 Saxon sunken featured buildings over here in an area where no Saxon material was previously located, and we got a substantial amount of Saxon pottery from these. More Saxon pottery than I think I've ever seen come off a site before, so this was really, really interesting and a great surprise. You gotta love it when the archaeology doesn't play ball. You expect Saxons to turn up over here and you get nothing over here because the Saxons are over there. It never quite behaves itself, does the archaeology. That's what makes it so much fun though. Okay, this is one of our Saxon sunken buildings under excavation. You can see there's numerous stake holes in the ground here. So we're having a bit of a debate over these. We don't know whether they're just strange little holes in the floor, perhaps rooting or something, or whether they are stakes that were holding a suspended floor. The debate is open on that. I'm not good enough with Saxon buildings and up to date enough with Saxon research to know whether or not a suspended floor is a real thing in Saxon sunken buildings or not. I quite like to think that that is what it might be, because I can't see the purpose of these little stake holes otherwise. But I'm going to leave that to you to consider. Although I did once hear a very compelling suggestion that perhaps they were structural markers, so the Saxon engineer, or equivalent of a Saxon engineer, setting out where the sunken building was going to be, may have made all these holes to work around in order to create the building. That's one theory. I personally rather like the suspended floor theory, but as I say, I leave that open to debate for everybody else. These are examples of our Saxon pottery. This crushed material down here we got from one of the evaluations. And another story about how archaeology doesn't quite play ball. This stuff, when we found it, looked so much like preserved wood. It fooled the person who was digging it fooled one of my supervisors, it fooled me, and it fooled the county archaeologist, because we all stood there, looked and went, yeah, that probably looks like preserved wood. So we treated it the same way you would treat preserved wood, kept it nice and damp, bagged it all up, kept a load of water in the bag and things, sent it back to the specialists, who took one look at a piece that they pulled out and told us, "You idiots, this is Saxon pottery, what are you doing?" So we were thoroughly chastised for that one, but it fooled enough of us into thinking that it was wood that we were happy we'd made the decision. But we shall definitely look a little more carefully in future when we're digging these things out. But yeah. We were less confused by these really nice pieces of pottery that came out of the sunken buildings. So we only had one or two fragments of decorated material. This was by far the prettiest, and again, I'm sorry for the quality of the picture. I think it's a little bit blurred, but we have the nice ridges just in here and some really lovely sunburst or flower stamped designs, depending on how you choose to interpret it. So we're getting close to the end of my talk now. You can thankfully stop listening to me waffling and droning on in just a little bit. But what do we know about Manydown? How has it changed through time? Basically, what we know from the evaluation is that people have been actively using the Manydown site since the Bronze Age, where we seem to have a generally funerary landscape and just this activity on the diagonal through here. In the Iron Age, they seem to be settling. The site became home to 4 distinct rural settlements. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These seem to continue into use into the Roman period, or at least into the early Roman period. We can still see the 4 distinct areas through this map. And the most surprising thing about the site is the high level of Saxon material that we have, certainly from this side of the site, but through the central area in general. Saxon material is quite unusual for this area. There is very little Saxon activity known. I'm vaguely aware of Saxon burials that have been found somewhere just up this way, so it's not entirely outside of the realms of probability that we do have Saxon settlement in this area. But I'm hoping that as we do more work, or as anybody does more work on the Manydown site, we will be able to see more results. A substantial number of features from our evaluation remain undated, and so this rough pattern of settlement and change through time that I have just here with dots could change, hopefully will change, will become more filled out as further and further archaeological work takes place on the site and produces more results. There will be further work on the site. It seems to have all sort of slowed down now at the moment, but we know that there is further work planned in the future. So whether it's us, whether it's somebody else, there will be more archaeological work done on this huge site ahead of the development that goes on. Right. So we experienced a lot of changing seasons on site. It was a very challenging site for me and my team to do. We started it in August, we finished it in March, we worked right through a rather horrible winter. We started with beautiful sunlight, it was really nice. We worked through Halloween, we worked through snow, we worked through rain. We were constantly bailing out features through sort of spring as it got really, really wet. But yeah, the team all took it in generally good heart, though we had a lot of issues going on with the changeable weather. It's the sun. We're never happy as archaeologists. It's either too wet, too dry, it's dusty, it's cold, there's too much sun and we have to make our own shadows, or it's underneath snow or underneath water. I think we're happy to dig for about 3 days of the year. But we seem to keep carrying on doing it. I also wanted to put my favourite find in here. The team think I'm a bit nuts, but this is my Taylor Swift guitar. It's my favourite find. It now lives next to my desk. We think it comes from her Fearless tour of 2017. The find specialists don't seem to be particularly interested in it, which doesn't bother me. It means I get to keep it. And that wraps us up with my talk now. So if you want to get in touch with MOLA, our website is mola.org.uk. We have a Facebook feed, Museum of London Archaeology, and you can tweet us at Mola Archaeology. And just to prove to you that my team did have fun and I wasn't too mean, here is a picture of 3 smiling but dirt-covered archaeologists. They're not going to tell you that I made them smile for the photograph and they were ready to kill me just afterwards. So that's how site work goes. you'd like to keep up with me, I've written 2 fictional books, The Mysterious and Arondites, which is an Arthurian legend-style adventure, and Echoes of the Eternal City, which looks more at Roman mythology. I have my own website, which is www.smporterauthor.co.uk. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at smporterauthor. I have a YouTube feed. If you search for SM Porter Author, you should come across it, and both my books, The Archaeological Adventures, are available on Amazon should you wish to buy one. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope I managed to inform you about what was going on at Manydown. It wasn't too dull, and it wasn't a massive overload of information. I'm aware that some of those maps were rather dense and there was a bit of repetition going on, but hopefully I was able to put across what we'd done and what we found. Thank you again for listening, and goodbye.